Thank you so much. I have met some of you, or all of your faces now look very familiar, so it's nice to see you again. My name is Sarah DeWitt. I'm from the Master Gardener class of 2021, which is an all virtual class. So definitely it's been fun to listen to everyone doing all their in-person stuff these years. So when I started volunteering, I was working on the Tennessee Smart Yards project. I did outreach work and presentations for that for a couple of years. And then I joined the staff of the Knoxville Botanical Garden 2 years ago, actually on May 8th. So it's almost been exactly 2 years. I do engagement work at the Botanical Garden, which means I run our youth education programs, preschool story time, field trips, adult workshops, and walks. We have one tonight that I'll tell you a little bit more about if you just cannot get enough of dogwood today. And then I'm also in charge of a lot of our communications and marketing work and community engagement. So it's a very exciting time to be working at the Knoxville Botanical Garden. I'm wearing all my badges today. I'm the trail chair for the Morningside Dogwood Trail, which is the Dogwood Arts program. So the Morningside Trail it runs into the Knoxville Botanical Garden. So we're actually the eastern side of that trail. And so it's been really fun to partner with them and just celebrating the beauty of one of the most iconic trees that we have here in Knoxville. So this is not really a talk just on dogwood plants, but more of kind of an introduction to the relationship between the Howell family and dogwoods and kind of the East Tennessee nursery landscape environment over many, many decades and several centuries, actually. How many of you have been to the Knoxville Botanical Garden? Oh, that's amazing. Great. And how many of you are familiar with the Howell family story? Cool. I'll be doing a little bit of a refresher for some of you, and hopefully be giving you some new information, even if those of you who've heard about it may not know some of these things. So here is just some of the early history of the family on the property. The property, even prior to the Howells, would have been land that the Cherokee people would have used. And right after the Revolutionary War, David Wessel Howell got a land grant for land that at the time was in North Carolina. It wasn't yet part of Tennessee, for his service in the war. So he started kind of growing vegetables. That was kind of his introduction to what they were growing on the property. And several generations later, you had S.S. Howell establish the Howell Nurseries. That business was for a long time one of the oldest businesses in Tennessee, and continually operating businesses in Tennessee, oldest and longest time operating businesses in Tennessee. And it grew to be 13 different locations, and they really were one of the premier nursery production facilities in the southeastern United States. They had a lot of influence and presence in the nursery industry. The theme of this family that every generation kind of takes their own variation on growing. You had two different brothers in the 1900s of the Howell family legacy, Joe Howell and then Steve B. Howell, and they established basically like two different businesses on the property. The property today is 44 acres, but it used to be much bigger. It went all the way down to the river. It's incorporated a lot more land. So you can still kind of see the delineation on the property today in terms of one side being more focused on nursery plants and growing, and one side more agricultural, focused on a lot of hardscaping and that kind of material as well. The family was still running the business all the way up until right around 2000. And Jenny Howell Jukes, one of the daughters of Joe Howell, she actually left her career to continue the nursery landscape business and kind of keep that legacy alive until she knew, nobody else was going to carry on this tradition, and they were really trying to figure out what was going to happen to the property and this legacy that the family had with plants in East Tennessee. Not just private citizens, but there were private citizens and community members, and then with the help of the Aslan Foundation, a group of people coming together to really purchase the land, which happened over 2 or 3 different periods of time right after 2000 and kind of happened between 2004 and 2008. to create a public garden. So here's a picture of, if you've ever been and you know the roundhouses, they built those quite a long time ago, and they would use their landscape nursery staff team in the off season. They would do a lot of the hardscaping so they could keep those folks continuously employed on the property. So a lot of the stone walls and things were done by people who were also in charge of growing a lot of the plants. I just found an article, archived article in the News Sentinel, and I just really loved what she had to say about her dad. Like, you know, I think a lot of us can identify with this. Like, as long as our bodies are moving, we will be growing things and landscaping. So this family really had like a zest and a love for all things horticulture and landscaping beauty. The Howell family made quite a few introductions of plants into the commercial nursery industry. This is probably not exhaustive, but as you know, history is open to a lot of rewriting and individual perspectives on stories. So there are some that are, I think, less certain whether they actually were the first to be responsible, although they probably had big influences on things like cedars of Lebanon that are still on our property that they brought over either from seed or seedling. But these in particular are ones that we are confident that they were involved in actually getting to the market. So specifically related to dogwoods, the Howells were out on the property, which was Prosser's Woods, which is where the zoo is now, and they were hunting, and they came across a naturally occurring dogwood, a pink dogwood in the woods, and took a cutting of what became Sweetwater Red, and brought it back and did some work to graft it to become a new varietal called Cherokee Chief. So Cherokee Chief is one that you'll see on our property today. As far as I know, we've had a hard time tracing any sources back to the Sweetwater Red specifically, so that parent dogwood variety does not seem to be easy to find. Brian Campbell, who is a former director of horticulture at KBGA, had reached out to Bernheim Forest and Arboretum to see if they might have had any record in their accession of the Sweetwater Red, and they do not. So we've been trying to find other sources that catalog that original dogwood that they found close by the Botanical Gardens. They are also part of the history of dogwood trails in our community as well in multiple ways. So I was just on the phone with another Master Gardener, Nisa Dolan Brown, who is a retired architect and has done just countless hours of work at the Botanical Garden cataloging the history of the property and the contributions of the family. And she was just sort of recounting for me how they were actually all involved in the beginning of the Dogwood Arts Festival. And so one of the Howells was a co-founder of the festival itself. And then Martha Ash, who has a garden in her name on property, the mother of former Mayor Victor Ash, she was one of the people first involved in the creation of the Dogwood Trail Beautification Program. So the Dogwood Trails really started as a response to a very rude comment. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this, but a journalist came to Knoxville and basically trashed it, said unkind things, and the ladies of Sequoia Hills were not thrilled about that. So they got together and said, well, clearly this guy's never been here in the spring. And they really rallied together to start an effort to plant dogwoods all over their neighborhood, and it has now spread to 13 trails. But there's now 13 trails northeast, south, and west in Knoxville. This is the Morningside Trail, where the Knoxville Botanical Garden is. We are one of the featured trails this year. They change from north, south, east, and west every single year. So this year the trails that are featured are the East Trails. The other trail in East Knoxville is the Holston Hills Trail. Two really distinctive properties, and we've been really working to get more dogwoods planted along the Morningside Trail, worked with the church that's on the next hill across the street from the Botanical Garden. We installed more there. We've added 40 dogwoods just in the last 2 years along that side of the property, but you'll hear a little bit more about. We've been adding dogwoods kind of en masse for a while now. In the time that Brian Campbell was the director of horticulture at KBGA was kind of just when the garden was still making a transition from being a privately owned nursery business to a public garden setting. And they were really interested in creating a collection of dogwoods on the property because collections are, you know, a great feature of public gardens and kind of help people get their head around a space organized by one species or sort of theme of plants. So they went through and tried to really collect as many diverse types of dogwoods, which are in the Cornus family. And there are native dogwoods, non-native dogwoods, shrub dogwoods, tree dogwoods. So they just tried to really reach across the whole selection. This is actually a more recent picture of the red twig dogwood, which is the Cornus. And they are planted not on our dogwood walking trail, but just next to our dogwood event center. So you can see them as you start the dogwood walking trail. But they were just really trying to highlight the really wide range of Cornus options that you can enjoy and plant. So other features of our dogwood walking trail that we actually have amongst the dogwoods, we have a seep garden. I don't know if any of you have heard about seeps or heard the presentation by UT professor Dr. Schilling. Seeps are a naturally occurring geological formation where water kind of seeps up from the ground and then runs over a lot of rock, a lot of things like limestone. And so the plants that are going to grow in that environment are quite different than in a lot of other environments, and they are actually pretty special and unique. We have a number of them in Tennessee. They're very hard to see because they're often on private property, like half a mile off of a 2-lane highway. So they're not obviously marked necessarily for the public to view plants that are endemic to seeps. So we have worked with the information and research group of Dr. Schilling, Amanda Spangler, who's a UT lecturer who was also on staff at the Botanical Garden previously. They've worked really hard to bring in plants that might grow in a seep environment, and we're sort of doing a recreated seep, if you will. It's not a true seep, but we do have a water feature with gravel and running that water right over the gravel and really getting some of those plants established. So UT students came out last fall and did a bunch of plantings, so it's going to be time to come see that soon if you would like. And then our dogwood collection, and then the native fern garden that we just installed in the fall, and we'll be adding more native ferns this spring. Those ferns are native to Tennessee, North Carolina, and northern Georgia. And it's a really neat collection of those plants as well, kind of interspersed with the dogwoods on the trail. I think one of the coolest parts about dogwoods in general is just the wide variety. You are really, it's very color interest. I mean, we're always talking about this, right? Getting 4-season color interest in your garden, things that are going to stand out in the wintertime, things that are going to attract wildlife, that have those benefits to them and then are also just beautiful. This is the Cornus officinalis, which blooms in February. So this was our first dogwood to bloom this year. Beautiful yellow blossoms and a nice end spring. I think it snowed like 2 days after this, so we have some snowy pictures with those blossoms as well. And the Cornus as well. There's both red and yellow twig shrubby dogwoods that you couldn't ask for more color interest in winter than they provide. So they're also a really good refuge for small wildlife as well. And then just obviously we have a pretty wide number of flowering dogwoods, not just the straight species, but there's a lot of hybridization of dogwoods as well. They are, the ones that we've talked about today are both, I've said, there's native ones and non-native. So we've got Cornus officinalis is a non-native, Cornus moss is another non-native. But the native dogwoods are host larval plants for this butterfly whose name I'm now forgetting. The spring, my goodness, the spring azure. I was like, it's blue. I know it's blue. They're really special to that, and also really special for native bee populations as well. They're understory trees. They don't like to be baked in the hot sun. And they're just, really good for wild deer. Actually, really enjoy them. So be mindful of that if you're planting them at your house. I don't know how many of you already knew this. You're all always usually like 3 steps ahead of the general population. But the flowers on a dogwood that we call the flowers are really petals, or leaves, modified leaves. And then the center is really where you're gonna see the flowers, but it's not the thing that we typically refer to as like the dogwood blossom. So just to keep in mind, really the pretty color is a bract and not a flower. So if you wanna drive people crazy with your fun facts, you can tell them that. So this is kind of jumping past the original creation of a dogwood collection. There's been a lot of ups and downs on the property at KBGA, and some of that is 44 acres is quite a lot of land to corral and manage. And then also, you know, people are so inspired at Botanical Gardens that sometimes in our history, 20-year history as a nonprofit, there's been a lot of energy around the creation of new garden spaces. And so we're trying to round that out with the sustainability of the existing garden spaces, the sustainability of the actual nonprofit organization, which doesn't seem like as fancy and fun to look at, but is pretty critical so that we can sustain all of this environment into the future. 2014 is when we took what was a high tunnel tractor barn and turned it into the Dogwood Center, which if you've never been in there, it's a beautiful space for celebrations, windows that look out over those red twig dogwoods, and then the dogwood walking trail as well. We have another building that was renovated in 2018 that we use a lot for educational programming. We've done our Master Gardener native seed workshops in that space. And sometimes we'll bring our kiddos in there as well if the weather's bad for a time. The whole property is now, because of Nisa Dahlin Brown, the whole property is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which is really incredible. And we have just recently been starting work on the rehabilitation of the Howell Family home, which was built in the 20s and added onto into the 40s and has needed a lot of TLC. So the roof has been replaced, gutters, the siding has all been sort of fixed and I shouldn't say replaced, really rehabilitated. They took every single red clay tile off the roof, put on new underpinnings, and then put every single red clay tile back on the roof. Loud for a while and dusty. And so we're continuing work on the Howell Family home. Window lintels cost, you just wouldn't believe how much the casings of windows could cost. So we are in the process of moving ahead with that part of the renovation. As well, we have just approved a master plan and are very close to approving a strategic plan, and really just trying to, you know, forward the mission of being able to continue these collections on the property, these sort of places that the public can come and educate themselves. Wayfinding is something else that we're going to be really focused on in the future, and is really critical and also a very big ticket item. So we'll be fundraising for that as well. These are not dogwoods, but you know, you can't go wrong in the spring in Tennessee, and I just, you know, I love this picture. It's just a great vantage point of taking really all in the beauty of this place that we have here. And then there's a shout out to you all. We have an incredible group of Master Gardeners who've been part of really revitalizing the Dogwood Trail on the property in the last few months. They worked with UT students and groups to really spread new mulch, take out a lot of old dead plantings, put in a ton of new plantings along the trail in anticipation of being one of the featured trails this spring. Typically they're out here in the pollinator garden working on Wednesday mornings, but we've kind of pulled them into a bunch of other projects. They recently helped install new azaleas. We have a azalea entrance to the new Howell Family Legacy Garden, which is a garden that really is a tribute to the plants that the Howell family either loved or brought to market. So you'll actually see one of those crepe myrtles, the William Tooby crepe myrtle, watermelon red, in that garden. So just a nod, hollies will be in there as well, and then they were very well known for azaleas. So obviously the dogwood features too. That's Nisa, actually, so she gets a shout out in this too. So, you know, I think one of the cool things, this is a little bit of a plug, but I think one of the things that makes the Knoxville Botanical Garden unique is that we don't charge anyone to come. So the only way to maintain something like that is to have a really strong and robust group of volunteers who are willing to come out and give up their time and knowledge to really help facilitate, you know, this maintenance of a collection or rehabilitation of a plant area. And so our volunteers are incredibly involved, especially Master Gardener volunteers, with their knowledge to really, you know, keep the educational benefit and beauty of the landscape going as well. This is the house that I was talking about. And you know, we are now actually open every single day of the week. There's a lot of historical features in the home itself. We have a Howell reference library, kind of unofficial, but we do have books for sale, but we are also putting out books that either came from the family or have been donated by other local, you know, landscape and horticulture enthusiasts. And so we have a whole section of books that you're welcome to just pull out, peruse, kind of just like, it's fun to engage with material that informed, you know, the history of what was planted on this property and the way people thought about plants at the time. We still have some of the old Howell catalogs that list all of the plants. I had some of these were in those pictures I was showing you. Those are pictures from those catalogs. We have some of their ledgers from their garden sales as well. So there's a lot of cool historical material related to the Howell family and their work in the nursery industry still on site. And we're happy to say that more of that's now available for people to actually look at and engage with. This is, you know, what I'm doing when I'm not here, doing other talks. We have a lot of things coming up. Like I said, tonight actually, if you are learning, if you're interested in kind of taking a physical look at our collection of dogwood plants and learning more actually about dogwoods themselves and the wide number of cornice plants that there are. Brian Campbell will be doing a talk at 6 p.m. in the Dogwood Center. 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, our trail will be staffed by, well, sort of populated by staff and volunteers who have specific information about all of the different types of dogwoods that are on there, but also the other, there's a million other cool plants on that trail. So the information and sort of celebration won't just be for the dogwoods, but the whole plant environment community that's in that part of the property. So you're more than welcome to come to that. It's completely free. I have a flyer in the front. And our plant sale is this weekend too. And if you're a member with us, you can come tomorrow and shop early. And we've got a bunch of other things going on. So, you know, this is just the general overview. I think I'm happy to answer specific questions more to, you know, what they were doing on the property. This has definitely been an education for me in terms of really learning about the wide range of plants. The collection that was started with Brian Campbell's group really has diminished since it was planted. Some of that by learning curves of, well, this plant didn't do very well here. There's actually a couple dogwoods that don't do as well in Tennessee in general. There's a Pacific dogwood that nobody can seem to get to grow in this part of the country no matter how hard they've tried. There's also a ground cover dogwood that's really, my understanding is it's just best the more north you go. So it sounds like it will occur, I think it goes to about zone maybe 6. But it's a beautiful carpeting ground cover dogwood, and it grows like all the way up as high towards the North Pole as plants will grow. So yeah, I told my dad I would add that to his yard in Michigan because they're definitely in an okay space to do that. So, you know, I think my takeaways and also like encouragements for you is really to think also about the incorporation of non-native and native species together in harmonious ways. I think it's really, the cornice species is really, I'm gonna kind of go back to just a couple of those because I think it's worth looking at them again. The cornice species is just like such a celebration of the diversity of a family of plants. There's also ongoing taxonomy discussions about how they do or don't fit all into the same thing. They used to actually categorize Tupelo in the same family as dogwoods, and so when they started this collection, they had Tupelo put in not for randomness, but because it was actually at that point considered part of that family. So some of the evolution also is a result of just science and the ongoing learning that happens and recategorization of plants into different classifications. So, but I really think between the natives and non-natives, they play well together. They bloom, basically we have things blooming from February into May, and then you're getting beautiful like summer red berry interest and then fall color. I could not believe how good those looked in the fall this last year. And then winter as well. So, a plant for all seasons, if you will. But I'm happy to answer more questions. The family history and their participation in all these things is very dense. And the family tree information about who contributed what. I just learned that a cousin, Mary Howell, was the first female landscape architect to be hired by TVA to work on when Norris had just become established as a town. So if anyone's interested in some of the historical information, we have lots of things you could either help us with or learn from. We're always looking to do more of that and make that available to the public. And then I think our goal with celebrating the trail this year has been, to kind of re-enliven our Dogwood Trail and reestablish some of the areas of the trail that have diminished over time due to just like plant placement or plant health, or frankly just like lack of staff to really take care of them. So it's been a good celebration to really get back out there and re-enliven this collection, and hopefully you all will come see it this month while it's still in its prime form. I was a little worried about the frost that we were going to get nipped, but we came out okay. So any questions or any discussion or comments? Yes.
I have a question on propagation. So you mentioned the pretty red berries. Mm-hmm. Can you actually grow a dogwood from the berry, or is most of the propagation done by cuttings?
I imagine most of it's done by cuttings, but they're naturally occurring, which is how they found this dogwood the first time. So I do think you can. I've never heard about it being attempted that way. Most of the ones I know about are being propagated by cuttings.
And are any of them grafted?
Yes. And actually the Cherokee chief that's on our property, that again was that plant child of the Sweetwater Red, it will sort of show its grafted origins from year to year, and you'll get this weird tree with pink and white flowers. Someone will come in and kind of go, never mind you, and cut the white stem off, but yeah. Yes.
And I'm gonna go.
Okay.
Then I'll
Go ahead.
I noticed they had, in that little area near the event space where the dogwoods are, they've had a lot of trouble keeping all of them alive. What do you think has contributed to their demise?
The red twig ones specifically,
I'm
or
not sure. I'll just,
okay.
I'll
The shrubby
I'll
ones?
see I'll have them all there, and they'll all be leafed out, and then there'll be one or some that have just not made it.
I'm pretty sure that, I can't remember if that was last year or 2 years ago. I think there was actually a pest that was on the plant, because they did like quickly go from looking fine to declined. So they did a lot of heavy shaping and repruning this past winter, and I guess it's probably a wait and see. I wasn't involved in, so I can't tell you which pest it was.
What kind of pests are typically
Well,
bothering the?
that's a good question. I think they've done a lot of the propagation and breeding work because anthracnose was such a devastating disease for dogwoods. And then, I've seen woolly aphids can be a problem. I've seen actually kind of a long list of pests, borers as well. But a lot of the varieties that are sold today are specifically sold because they're resistant to a lot of that disease and pest pressure. Specifically like the dogwoods that Dogwood Arts sells in the fall, that's Appalachian spring, and it's specifically bred to be resistant to anthracnose. And powdery mildew as well. Bug front though, I don't know as much.
You had mentioned that Mary Howell was the first landscape artist to work for TVA. Did she do the area down there where you do the walking trail, or do you know what she did?
I mean, she worked for TVA, so she probably didn't do the work that happened on our property. She was doing other work in the community, but you know, we don't have good records of what family members were like physically on site. Are you talking about on our property specifically?
Well, I'm just talking about, you said Norris.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking the
Oh, you're
Norris
talking about the
walking
Norris.
trail, you know, have those trees all the way down through there. And then
That's
they
a good
have
question.
The dogwood trees that are spaced out in different areas down through there too.
I don't know about that. I will ask because I feel like we would like to know as well. I was just learning this morning that the Howells they donated and hired people during the Depression to plant dogwoods along Kingston Pike, both as a way to provide employment, but also as a way to beautify that area and continue like the celebration of dogwoods. We have NISA has put together a whole family tree that, you know, I think are really one of our biggest challenges is just culling all of this information and getting it into readable formats, you know, that people can absorb. I'll pass this around in case you want to look at it. But we have a lot of that information and are definitely willing and happy to have people help us work on getting that out into the public in knowable ways. NISA's done a lot of amazing work, but we have a lot of different documents that sometimes don't even all track the same. This is just the generations of Howell people that they know about that made contributions. So this is not specific to dogwoods because they were doing such a wide range of plants. But this is just kind of and she actually has an Excel sheet that lists all the family members and how they were related, because it's actually also a very large family, and there are still branches of Howells or relatives of Howells in the area. Reverend Amy Morehouse, who's at our church, Ann and I's church, she's a relative of Jenny Howell Jukes, who was the last Howell to live in the family home. And she alludes to a lot of, you know, different sort of fragmented parts of the Howell family, some of whom, you know, were fine with the sale of the property to a botanical garden, some of whom would have liked to not see it leave the family. So there's, I'm sure, a lot of good, juicy stories in there. Well, and I think the beginning of the nonprofit was years of just site clearing work. I mean, really, and some of the features of the nursery business are still there. So if you start this little dogwood walking trail, you'll enjoy encountering the seep garden and then the upper trail and all of it. So we've installed a bunch of native plants in that part of the property. And then you'll hit the Cherokee Chief dogwood at this little roundabout. And if you go to the right and look down that way, there's a straight line of beech trees that are there because they grew all their plants in ground, and then when people came to the property to buy them, they would dig them up right then and there, and they would have tea in those roundhouses while they waited for their plants. But they just, once they left the property, the trees just were left there. So we have this like very close together and straight line of trees that, you know, nature would put them that way, but they're interesting to look at as a remnant of that. Yeah.
Coming back to dogwoods, you described them as being an understory tree. Are there particular big trees that they do well with?
So in our specific setting, it's beech, and there are some oak trees as well. And I am not familiar with whether there are some they don't play nicely with. I mean, ours are all other deciduous trees. It's not a lot of conifers or evergreens. Yeah.
Why do so many homeowners plant them in their front yard when they're taking their sign?
Yeah.
These are good questions, Marcia. Yeah, it's you know, it's a similar nod to like a Japanese maple where it's like, well, they can live, but their flowers won't be as good, they won't be as happy, they're more stressed. You know, it's not that they won't ever live, but it's that they're not going to have the nicest, longest life possible. And you know, I think that's just really critical to keep in mind. It's like, well, I planted it there and it was fine. It's like, well, there's a difference between surviving and thriving, you know, so. it is really nice to see it's nice to see how happy they are in an environment where they're really being served as an understory tree. I will say another, kind of curiosity I have, and something that we're working a lot on reinstalling a lot of plant signage. Something that just happens over time is you just have a lot of signs go missing or fall apart, or so it's been hard to keep track of some of, especially the hybrid dogwood varieties that we have. And unless you're like analyzing specific blooms, or you're analyzing the bark and the leaves, like it takes a lot of time to actually get to which variety is this one or which hybrid is this. So, I think we're always looking for better management strategies to re-identify plants. I feel like that could be a really interesting project or something to talk about as master gardeners in general, which is like, what can we do when we're going into an environment where it's not obvious what the specific varieties are, but it matters a lot to be able to name that. You could say, oh, well, I know that's generally this. But if we're trying to celebrate like a wide diversity, something we've really struggled with and then worked really hard on getting back to understanding is we had a list of this over 80 species of dogwoods on the property, which is now probably more like 30 or 40. But some of that's just, a lack of ability to keep track of what was growing where, and things like that, and just how critical it is in a garden, a public garden, to be really mapping those things. And again, that goes back to enthusiasm about installing new gardens without management systems for existing installations. So I think that's an awareness we've all been growing in.
I always assumed that the red berries that are on the dogwoods would be the ultimate answer to how many blooms you'd have on the tree next year. And that's not true. Because a lot of the birds come by and eat the berries. But my tree out front of the house, and it sits in a lot of shaded areas, so it doesn't get a whole lot of direct sun, but it still gets sun. It didn't have as many blooms. But the one in the back, which didn't have any seeds, it was abundant with blooms. So why is that?
Well, the berries are actually coming on as the fruit that comes from the flower. So the blooms are producing those, and you're not actually getting blooms from the berries and seeds. You're getting seeds and berries from the blooms. So it's the order. I think some of it's like you're looking at it in an order. It's going to be flower and then the fruit. And the fruit's not going to determine the flower for the next growing year. Is it possible, did you do any pruning?
Yeah, I did, but not much.
What time of year?
It was the dead branches.
Oh, just dead branches. Because I was going to say, if you're doing any pruning and you're doing it before the blooms come out in late winter, you're going to be impacting the number of blooms. So it's one of those trees that you would want to prune after the blooms have come into full. I mean, some of that could just be, is it like that every year, or has it just been like that this one year?
That's just this year. In previous years, it's been for
Many.
with blooms. So.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that those harsh, like
I was gonna say
December
weather.
22,
Yeah,
if the temperature dropped before trees had gone dormant,
yeah,
it had already formed buds for the following spring, and they probably got frozen.
yeah.
So that would give you a smaller bloom in the spring of 23.
And some of our plants have taken 2 full years to bounce
recover.
back from that. Mhm. Probably more weather or pruning than anything else. I learned that officinalis refers to a plant that's going to market for some kind of herbal property, which I thought was super fun and had no idea about, and learned that when I was, we featured our Cornus officinalis in one of our newsletters in I think February or March. And it's sort of like whether or not they actually had medicinal herbal properties is one thing. It's sort of like people assumed they did. But as I was, sort of hastily looking through additional information on dogwoods in the last few days, I found a nod to the idea that they had also been used in herbal medicinal contexts as well. So if that's interesting to you, go do your further work. We have a pagoda dogwood, which is the alternate leaf. I'm sorry I didn't include a picture of that in here. Sometimes they call it the Christmas tree dogwood. Because of the shape of it, it like really kind of does look like a Christmas tree. And so it's having that alternate leaf as opposed to opposite leaf. So the leaves are going here and then here and then here.
That's all.
That's opposite. And we're talking about alternate, so not aligned. Also, I think, you know, this is where it's important to think about common name versus Latin name. The Japanese Cornell dogwood, the Cornus officinalis, this one, is not the same as the Cornelian cherry dogwood, even though Cornelian and Cornell, one time I went, they even sometimes get listed on the same one as being what you could call it. And you're like, well, how confusing is that? Those are like two entirely different plants, but we're calling it the same thing. So, yeah, the deeper you go, the more just use the Latin names.
I'm a pharmacist, and one of the reasons I enjoyed pharmacy at the beginning was all of the plants that are used medicinally.
Yes.
And so then I looked up, the NIH has a complete review of where they are with studies and everything on looking at Cornus species.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yes.
Yay.
So it's on NIH's
Perfect.
website. So
Thank
it tells
you.
you what studies they've done, what studies are
That must have been the
lacking.
link, and I went, oh, that's cool,
Yes,
and then I just
yes.
didn't have time.
NIH has that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's amazing. We also have a native medicinal herb garden on the property that definitely, I think, you know, I mean, we're doing a lot of plants for wayfinding signage, but some of those gardens are going to need real orientation towards not just what the name of the plant is, but why it was important, why it was used, or why it's still used. So there you go.
And you have the, not that it's related to that, but you also have the native plant rescue people doing work.
And they'll be out at our plant sale this weekend, so yeah, we have a great relationship with them.
So where can we get more information on the plant sale? Is it here?
Well, I had handouts at the front, so it's on our events website. The member previews tomorrow night from 4 to 7, and the regular sale is Saturday 9 to 2. And we are Nisa, the famous Nisa, will be there at 11 and 1 on Saturday doing tours of the house. So if you want the best tour of the house, this weekend is a good time to do it. 11 or 1. She's going to do the exact same tour twice.
Okay.
So 11 or 1 on Saturday.
Do you have to have a ticket or anything to buy?
You just show right up and wait right by the front door, and she'll be ready for you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, Sarah, thank you
Thank
so
you
much
for
for
having
talking.
me.
Before we dismiss, we do have the evaluation. So the evaluation, you tell Sarah how fabulous she is. And then on the back, this is how we figure out what our next presentations are, is based on your ideas. And usually I tell you about this at the beginning, but I was so excited about Sarah talking, I left it out. So